see the screen?
Yep,
I see it. I'm going to do a couple things today. One of them is take a cruise through 35F and then through 22 LA. There's a couple of notice forms. Notice forms that are in there that reflect from that, and we'll go through those. If I have time, I'd like to jump back to last week and do a wrap up. We talked a little bit about time. I put it in the notes that were sent out, and I'd like to review that because it's something that when you're writing a purchase and sale agreement, you got one bite at the apple to try and set up your Form 35. So if I get to that, I'll like to do that. I'm doing 35F first because out of all the different forms for feasibility, it's probably the simplest in the sense that it kind of covers everything on the planet. You really can do anything you see in the Form LA, in the purchase and sale agreement area for feasibility. It's just wide open. You can use those other forms as things you might talk to your buyer about wanting to use. I found over the last 11 years, I've done so many land deals, I forgot that there's also an application for feasibility with residential. It's nothing wrong with having an inspection 35 and a 35F, because some buyers are looking at the feasibility, whether it's going to be feasible to use it for a nightly rental, if it's feasible to build an accessory dwelling on it, or to do something else. And so don't just think of land when you look at both of these forms. They can go either way. Okay. So 35F, I'm going to go to the manual first and just do a quick overview. Again, everything I have up here will be in the minutes, so you don't have to worry about trying to scramble, write it down. So it's really an investigation to see if the property is suitable for the intended purpose. Can they construct? Can they make improvements? And the real distinction between inspection and feasibility, inspection is for satisfaction of something that's already been built, where feasibility is something that's going to be built in the future or done in the future. So you're not inspecting something that hasn't been built yet. You're seeing about whether it's going to meet your intended purpose for use in the future. In doing that, the form is different from inspection. It has a nice little encapsulation of what I just mentioned. Buyers to inspect improvements on the property. This form allows buyers to determine if the property can be used in accordance with the buyer's intentions. Another thing that's about this form it's very warm and fuzzy for the buyers is that it's a subjective form. You do not have to prove something in order to say, I don't like the property and I want to get out of it. And so it really is an all-purpose type form. So if I jump into the form itself, right in the very first sentence, I mean, other than you get from the days, is talking about is the suitability of the property for the intended purpose, including but limited to whether the property can be platted, built. This feasibility contingency shall conclusively be deemed waived unless the buyer gives notice of disapproval before the feasibility. So it's an automatic waiver. So the buyer has to take action and give timely notice if they don't like the property. And of course, they can get their earnest money back. There's a pretty extensive between line 9 and 18 of all the different types of things. Now, I'm going to show you something else here in a minute, in that there are really 3 different paragraphs that have been written for feasibility. If you read the one in Form 21, item U, which is next to the last page of the PSA, what the description there is very different than the description here, versus in 22 LA, when we go there, is different again. And so really, if you know what your buyer is really intending to do with their property, you may choose one of those 3 as being the best feasibility paragraph for them to be able to choose for their purchase and sale agreement, because there's one automatically there with Form 25. As always, there's a disclaimer in here: buyers, agents, representatives, consultants, architects, and engineers shall have the right from time during the feasibility to enter the property to conduct tests and studies. You can do destructive testing as long as it's returned to the original condition. The buyer shall be responsible for all damage and make sure that that's taken care of. But other than that, this form is very straightforward. It's only one page. Slips right into your purchase and sale agreement.
I did want to cover one thing at the bottom of that, and I don't know if it's, is it different on Form 35? Basically, there's the checkbox that says if you don't give notice of satisfaction, it's automatically terminated.
Yes, you can reverse it to be the opposite of the way the form is written with that last checkbox.
Okay.
Right here it says the agreement terminated if notice of satisfaction not timely provided. If checked, this agreement shall terminate, and the buyer shall receive refunded earnest money unless the buyer gives notice to the seller on or before the feasibility contingency expiring date. The property is suitable for the buyer's intended purpose. So what it does is it just flips the entire form. It'll automatically terminate unless the buyer says, okay, I like it.
Is there a scenario where that would make more sense to do it that way? Because that just seems very final and very like, you know, if you had a bunch of feasibility stuff going on and you just lost track, not that anybody should do this, but if you did by chance lose track of the timeline, this automatically terminates. Seems like a very final thing that you can't really
you have a different degree of professionalism in real estate brokers in the landscape across our state and around our area. Mm-hmm. And checking that box, if you have someone that does not have a list of all dates that they're tracking for their buyer and staying on top of it, things expire all the time. And that one right there, to me, in that situation, depending on your other broker on the other side of the deal and whether you're on the buyer or seller, if I was the seller, I wouldn't like that one very much. I'm not really trying to track all of the dates for the buyer. I'm working for the seller. But if I see that on there, if that other broker and that buyer are asleep at the wheel, all of a sudden that thing terminates and I'm going, I just lost the deal.
Yeah.
And so I've never used it personally because I'm always pretty much on the buy side. I can ask my sell side expert over here. But,
yeah, I'm just curious if there's ever a time when it makes more sense. But for me, I would want to avoid that one just because
I'm like
you get outside the timeline. In most cases, you can usually, if it's agreeable, both parties still want to move forward, you can just sign an addendum that changes those timelines. But in this one, it's automatic.
That's easy. I mean, if you use the original form the way it's, and you don't check that bottom box, then if the seller doesn't jump up and say, I don't like it, it's waived and you go on with your deal.
Oh, good.
Okay. All right. Now in this one, if there is a waiver, I mean, if somebody does want to get out of that deal, then the form on that one is your notice form. That's when you'd pull up form 90P. 90P is a notice of termination of feasibility and disapproval, and it elects to terminate and demands the return of the earnest money. So the other thing it can do, if you are in a deal and you have a 21-day feasibility and 5 days in, they're happy, you can waive it early and then sometimes move up your closing date. If they really want to get up there and go camping right away or do what they want on the property, they can move up the closing date. So you can do two things with this form. It also demands the earnest money date, which is part of the contract. If for feasibility, it's a notice, only the buyer needs to sign this document. The only thing that's missing from this is a form 50, which tells your escrow officer that it's safe to release the retainage, because they'll want to have that, even though that form says it. Yeah, it gives them the warm fuzzy to let that earnest money go. Okay. So out of that, again, I've been always doing my little matrix for quick reading, quick reference, so that you don't have to read the form so much, telling you things that, no, this form is different than the inspection addendum 35. Buyer and seller mutually agree to the feasibility time period for the buyer investment, set the contingent expiration date. It automatically waives unless buyer gives timely notice of failure termination, unless they do the bottom box. Investigate if future improvements in feasibility can be done. Types of feasibility items are all listed out from lines 11 through 18 in the contract. checks a box, shall terminate automatically. That's the one we just reviewed on the bottom if you want that feature. And I mentioned that you want Form 90 to terminate if that's the case. So on that one there, it's pretty straightforward. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it because it really is simple, easy, straightforward. Okay. Now, if I move on to, yeah,
You said that it's okay to use that in conjunction with the 35?
you can. Absolutely. That's what Melody just asked, is it if this form can be used in conjunction with Form 35 inspection. Because you may have properties that have structures on it, but it's basically acreage. And 22 LA also has an opportunity to have structures as a part of it. When we get to it, we'll see that. But if it's an accessory dwelling, if it's listed as acreage, or even if it's listed as residential, you may want to see if it's an orchard that has a house on it. You might want to have inspection for the house and structures, and you might have feasibility to see if that orchard is feasible to subdivide.
So the feasibility would not cover a home inspection. Therefore, you would need the 35R to have the home inspection.
For the feasibility of what I want to do in the future with the property. So it's really a timeline that helps make the decision on that, because you're reviewing history with 35. It's something that's already been done, where 35F is something in the future that hasn't happened yet. And if you look at it as a timeline, it makes it easy for talking to your buyer about what form to use. Okay.
I've seen that example twice. One was a bed and breakfast, but it was being sold as a residential. So they wanted to do feasibility of the business.
Right.
And then the other one was a husband and wife that comes in and remodels. They knew the condition. They didn't even want an inspection. They already knew, but they wanted to see and get some bids to see if it was feasible to remodel it and rent it or flip it or yeah.
I had a hotline question I thought was interesting. It was somebody talking about using a form 22R and an S, which is a well addendum and a septic addendum, versus using form 22LA, and what acceptable practice is. And I was kind of interested by how the answer came back. 22LA can be used on a residential transaction. Okay. Used with Form 21 was the intention when Form 22LA was created. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, not Form 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the LA format, the inspection provision somewhat differently as between a buyer and a seller than do Forms 22R and 22S. Form 22LA allows the parties to assign which party will be responsible for obtaining the inspections and obligations of the seller to pay for the buyer's inspections. If seller fails to obtain the inspections the seller agreed to obtain, some brokers parties prefer the way that 22LA describes the breadth of the inspections over Form 22LA. There is no reason that the parties cannot or should not use either LA or R and S. Okay, again, that's our job, to be familiar with the terms of the forms and then knowing our client and just seeing which one fits them appropriately. You just don't want to put an LA in and an RS and an S. I mean, this is what I see when we're reviewing contracts, is multiple forms put in when you're using an LA and they're actually overlapping. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through, because that creates ambiguity in your contract, and that could be legal problems in the future if somebody complains.
Yeah, that's been great direction from you guys when I put too many things in there. It's like,
Yeah.
you're
So, well, if you're not really familiar and you don't really read it, it's easy to say more is better and throw a bunch of forms in your purchase and sale agreement. And
I want to cover my clients.
they were covered like a blanket, Melody.
Because in some cases, redundancy can help, like in the form of a 22RA. There's already an attorney review clause in Form 21 or 25.
Now, if you inadvertently put two different dates in there, now you have an ambiguity, and
Yeah,
sometimes an ambiguity, if you get a sharp lawyer, will void your contract.
That's why the 22RA is used, is because it's more specific.
Yeah.
Right. But with 22LA and 22R and S, using both of them doesn't get any more specific, it just causes the potential for conflict.
Well, our job is to write contracts that are clear and easy to understand for the layperson, our brokers, escrow.
Yep.
And when you start convoluting it with too many things you start getting confused if we're not careful how we structure our structure our purchase and sale agreements. So I wanted to pull that one up kind of first, just because I thought it was so interesting that one of the original intents to that form really was for residential. The other thing it was designed for is for large, complex acreage parcels. And so if you have a 20-acre parcel up in Bear Mountain or Badger Mountain, and it's recorded, it's been surveyed, 35F is probably going to be just fine, because you can do anything you want to that property to find out. You can do perk holes on it. You can check your surveyor corners. You can check the zoning, the codes, and what else you're going to do. However, if I have a 50 acre, 60 acre, 40 acre, 10-acre orchard, all of a sudden I've got things in there where I have a crop on it, or if I have marketable timber on it, or if it's been designated as a special tax category with a tax break as open lands. If I'm not careful, the buyer could end up having to pay taxes if you change it from timber or from one of those designations back into what their intended use is for putting a residence on, and have back taxes to pay on it. And then there's discussions about it. Do you do that during the deal so that the seller pays for that when you take that off for back taxes, or does the buyer get nailed on it? Now, when those things hit, 35F isn't your best tool. Now, that's where this 22 LA comes in. It's a better tool in these complex situations. And so I have this will be in the minutes that I send out, but I wanted to just touch on that. That is designated for large complex property transactions to evaluate crops, timber, potential developments, subdivisions, lot configurations, segregation, boundary line adjustments. The process of zoning designations apply. Care must be taken not to select other Northwest MLS forms that will conflict or duplicate the list of services prescribed in 22 LA. If the forms below are included in the purchase and sale agreement, they have the potential to create ambiguity and conflict. For example, Form 35 for inspection, 35F for feasibility, RA for attorney review, S for septic addendum, TS for survey addendum, well addendum. All of these are addressed in 22 LA. And so there's a red flag if you're receiving an offer as a listing broker and you see a 22 LA and any of these other forms in there, your radar goes up and you read it very carefully to make sure what boxes are checked in 22 LA, and if this other form refers to it when it's checked, then when you make a counter offer, you want to correct it. Okay.
Do you know what takes precedent? Does 22 LA take precedence over any of those addendums?
Well, that's a wonderful question, because you just asked me to make an interpretation, which is the rule for a lawyer, and we do not have the authority as real estate brokers to do interpretations. We have the authority act as a lawyer to select forms and fill forms out. And then a hammer comes down. If you start talking about interpretations, then you have to say, I can't answer that. You would need to talk to an attorney.
And then they say, well, why did I hire you?
Yeah, but we know we really are on that. You're walking right on that edge when you start interpreting. And I was talking yesterday, I can't remember who, but we were helping with the coaching for doing a purchase and sale agreement, and they're doing 35 22C, and talking about using a real estate contract versus a note and deed of trust. And I advise be very, very careful. The buyer needs to select. You can point out things from reading out of the contract, what's there as a broker, but the choice of going one versus the other needs to be the client. You cannot recommend one or the other. You can educate it, but you can't recommend it.
Here's what this means, and here's what this
means.
This
When one of these sound better to you than
So it's
another.
your choice to determine which works best for you.
Correct. Okay.
Or talk to your.
So I wanted to point this out. That's why I want to put this into the minutes for today. Also, I've got it on the quick reference matrix that I'll be passing out with that also. So I wanted to take a look at that. The next thing I wanted to look at is the manual for the 22 LA. I'll attach this to our minutes because it's a good document. Let's see that this addendum should be used for transactions involving large parcels. And also what he puts a note in here with agency law requires that you advise your client to seek expert advice on matters relating to the transaction that are beyond your expertise. Okay. In that case, you're either if it's beyond your expertise, you find an expert for them to talk to. But if it has to do with interpretations, then you have to have them talk to a lawyer. So what this form does, though, it goes through each of the areas to fill out on LA and gives a little overview of it. In this case, we're talking about superseding. We don't have to interpret that one. They did it for us. If you check the box for additional provisions for additional, and you fill in whatever is relevant, anyone is the well addendum and this or that and the other, what it's saying is please note that if the feasibility study box is checked, paragraph supersedes and replaces feasibility contingency in Form 25 of the vacant land purchase agreement. Okay. So I thought it'd be valuable.
So the box in this one, the 22.
If you check the box in 22 LA, this goes away
The 25.
in Form 25. That's correct. So let's look at Form 25. So if I come down to Form 25, line 15 is expiration of 21 days. However, what I've been doing to try and make it clear in my hoppers, if I'm using Form 35F, I like clicking this box and say see Form 35F, and it clarifies it right away.
Or 22 LA?
Or 22 LA.
What other one? Okay.
You want to refer that, and that way it leaves this empty, and then I only have that date in one place in my contract. I don't inadvertently put 21 here and 10 in the other.
That's good.
That's what I'm always looking out for, is not doubling up. Now, another thing is in this contract is that refers to feasibility contingency in you. Specific term 15 is the line we were just looking at. And so the responsibility to verify contingency and expiration date in term 15. Now, in this case, since we've referred somewhere else, it doesn't apply. We're really clear about it. Now, if you want to use this one, it should include but not limited to, this is the area I was referring to when you start reading what's in Form 35 and 22 LA. This area of the feasibility is written differently. There's different things in it. And I know we only have an hour to go over things, so I don't like just sitting reading contracts to everybody, but I just want to draw it to your attention, and they'll send this out. And so please read it. And I try to highlight to draw your attention to the areas to make sure. But buyers and buyers agents, representatives, consultants, and engineers shall have the right. So we have the right to access the property. Same conditions. Specific term number 15 shall be conclusively deemed that the buyer has satisfied development, construction, and feasibility. So it automatically waives, just like Form 35F, unless you give notice, timely notice, and earnest money is to be returned. Feasibility contingency addendum 35F, if included in the addendum, supersedes the feasibility contingency and specified in Form 15. So in this case, the LA supersedes this, but this here in the body of 25 explains that 35F supersedes this right here. So between those two.
Then the 35F would also supersede the LA.
No, you don't ever want to use a 35F and a 22 LA in the same agreement. You see, it's an either or.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because you're doing
But
feasibility
the
with
goal is-
feasibility. You're saying feasibility
Yeah.
twice. You have the chance of saying two different dates in those things.
But the
And
goal
I've
is to
seen
write
that.
it cleanly enough so that you don't have to worry about what supersedes what.
Yes, that's the selection. That's the expert, as we're experts, selecting the correct form for the situation. Understanding the buyer and what they want to do to satisfy before they buy the property helps us pick the right form for their situation. Okay. Also here it says the seller shall cooperate with the buyer in obtaining any permits or other approvals. The buyer may be responsible to require buyer's intended use of the property, provided the seller shall not be required to incur liability or excess expenses in doing so. Trying to keep that on the way things are designed in all of these forms that have a feasibility inspection is the buyer being responsible for the cost of the inspections. I'm just going to do a quick note that in my past lifetime, 40 years in construction and contracts and arbitration, mediation and claims and disputes, whenever my client or myself, depending on what my job was, hire an expert, I expect that expert to be loyal to me. I want their fiduciary responsibility to look and scale everything in their report for the benefit of who's hiring them, which is me. I've never forgotten that, because my party on the other side of the lawsuit or the other side of the dispute will hire an expert. And what happens when I get in front of a judge or an arbitrator is those two experts argue each other. And somewhere along the line, the arbitrator, judge, the jury, whatever, are going to decide which one of those experts they believe the most. So I never understood why I'd want to pay for the seller to get an expert for me to believe the report that they produce. Somehow my logic has never been wired that way. Okay. And in LA, you can have the seller do it, or you can have the buyer do it for who's paying for things. And I think people that are inexperienced brokers that don't do a lot of land deals check a lot of boxes that I really question, because if I'm a listing broker and they want the seller to do it, I might talk to my seller. I said, well, you have control of that expert. You have control of what they inspect, and they have a duty of fiduciary responsibility to produce a report for you because you're hiring them. And I don't know why, as a buyer broker, I'd ever want to put my buyer in a position like that. And so it's just food for thought. I don't think there's a right or wrong out there. It's just, this is my experience. That's what I've learned over the years.
It's that LNA is also interesting that on the survey, I don't know about now, but prior to like July, surveys were like 90 days out.
Yes.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so if you're asking for that, good luck. That's
You're gonna have
No
to
deal.
have a long close.
yeah.
Well, and you knowing that and having that conversation with the other side and saying, hey, you guys realize this is, you have not put enough time in here to cover
Okay.
your.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, having that conversation with the agent saying, look, here's where we're at, and my seller wants to accept your offer, but the time does not compute.
Yeah.
And that's where, as brokers, with all the deals that we do, if we ever had an inspection where you need to find a plumber or an electrician, you can't get them tomorrow. Okay. But if you only have 5 days, whatever, to do something, you're in a box. You could have changed that 5 days when you wrote your purchase and sale agreement and put in 2 weeks. Same thing with LA and with 35F. Some thought really needs to be put into what does it pop up if my buyer wants to have a survey done or have corners and say, I want the seller to go out and locate the corners and hire a survey. If they really want the property, and if it's already been surveyed before, and if I have a copy of the survey, it's recorded, then locate the corners after you buy the property. Have somebody go out and locate it. But to put it on the seller, how are you going to get that done and still have your closing without having a long time
Well,
extension?
I have a listing right now that we're, the seller is already aware of the boundary line issue with the neighbor.
Hold on one second. Maria, can you hear Melody? Chat box here.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you, Maria. Okay.
There's
Yeah, please
already-
speak up a little bit.
Okay,
Make sure.
there's already a boundary line issue that he's aware of, that they've been arguing over it. And he's in the process of getting that situated before we ever get listed, which is like,
Oh,
thank you,
wow.
Lord, for being on top of that
Right.
and me not having to, But then I've had another property where the corners were an issue, and the buyer wanted to know what they were, and I'm like, that's your responsibility to get the survey. It's not.
Okay. See, Melody, talking as a listing broker,
Mhm.
it's hard enough to get a deal, but it's even harder to keep it from blowing up from the boogeyman during the transaction. And I found that whenever I say I don't know to a question, if they haven't made an offer, they back away and don't. And if you're in your process of mutual, if you say, I don't know, then all of a sudden you have time problems. What you're doing is being proactive and saying, what, if I'm going to buy this property, what do I want to know? Has there been a survey? Can we find the corners? You know, has there been any kind of feasibility done on it? Anything that you can provide, just get a copy of the recorded survey, have it on hand. So if the buyer broker asks for it, oh, here you go. And all those give a warm blanket because you have fast answers and they're accurate answers. And what you're doing as a listing broker is really trying to reduce the boogeyman factor in your deal. Yeah, and it's really proactive. So land and acreage addendum. I really found this interesting that it is extensive if you read this, and if you're a buyer, it pretty well puts all of this on your back. I know that caveat emptor is in play here with buyer beware. But buyer has observed and invested in the property and reached buyer's own conclusion as to the adequacy, acceptability, and pursuit based solely on buyer's examination of the property. Accepted method of identifying boundary lines and properties, surveys, corners, and say that's the only accepted methodology for boundary lines. Generally accepted methods determine on-site sewage disposal. See, that's another point. Sometimes you have raw land, but they've gone ahead and they've got it ready for an RV pad so you can go out there and camp. So it might have a septic system in it, might have power and a transformer on it, might have a well and power on it. So that's where an LA might come in because it kind of hits a lot of things that you can wrap up and make sure that they're addressed. General accepted methods for determining water quality. You know, a well addendum will do that, or this will do it. Conducted experts determine gallons per minute, so flow test and quality test. Property is currently taxed, reduced rate tax because of special classifications, open space, agricultural, forest land. Tells the buyer about that. Generally accepted methods of determining value of timber, growing property. You know, as I go down through this, if I use my example of Badger Mountain that's sitting out there where they're going to use it for camping or hunting, I haven't really hit anything here that's really going to, you know, raise something for somebody using that type of a property. Or let me take another one. How about Silver Spur up in Brewster? It's got a clubhouse in it, and there's selling 20-acre parcels. You know, it's got good roads into it. You know, I mean, to use something extensive as this, that's why I say, you know, 35F might be a good choice for those types of acreage. Okay. On-site sewage, additional tests or inspections located for state government agencies. Seller may have entered into a lease or rental agreement. If you think there's a lease or rental agreement, then that's a good thing to articulate. Seller shall have the right to harvest all crops. Okay. So that whole front area, that whole front page is really an overview of a lot of the topics that are now covered in detail in 22LA. So then there's the contingencies. Except for feasibility application, it shall be performed by qualified professionals. Okay. Contingency periods, if the buyer gives notice of disapproval and termination, earnest money is returned if it's done timely. Items checked below are being paid by the seller or the buyer. I kind of give my 2 cents worth on this one here. As I came down through here, and I'm going to send this one out with the minutes because I wrote all over it, but this is where, if this box is checked, I want to make sure if there's a 22 TS in my agreement. Oh, I don't want to have an overlap. It's either one or the other. I don't want to correct it in my counter offer. Perk test. Now, perk test is the same thing. At 22, where's 22 is for septic. So that one there really could. Bear with me. So 22S could be applicable for that one there for perk test. On-site sewage, the 22S or 35 inspection addendum.
So you're saying if those are also in the offer?
Yep, just be careful. Just read them carefully. I just want to put flags out there. That's my, when I'm reviewing my offer coming into me.
But this could be used as an overall deal, and I identify who's paying for what.
Right. Yes.
Without the other forms. I like that.
Yes, because see the on-site sewage typically in the 22S as far as septic system, you know, the seller usually is the one that has to provide the information, then the installation, then also on any of the maintenance on it. If it's a sewer, they have to have the well, in septic you have to have the tank pumped and show it's been inspected within the last year. But if you have a sewer, that's where you want to know how old it is and get in there, and if the sewer hookup and lines, are they 80 years old or is it a new development? You know, I mean, it makes a difference in which one you want to use.
Is the sewer part included? Because I know there's like a spot on Form 35 to do a sewer scope.
Yes.
Is an
Form
actual
35
sewer-
has inspection addendum, has a sewer.
And is that included in the on-site sewage system section here, or is that's separate? 'Cause it's not an
That-
on-site sewage system.
They didn't address it in this one.
Okay.
And I think the reason why is because for acreage and land,
It's rare.
it's not inside a city and hooked up to a sewer system in a city,
There's like
generally.
there's a couple of like I'm just thinking of Shasta, and there's some within the urban growth area that will need to be grandfathered into the sewer system, but it's rare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and well, and also you see on 22, I put the septic one here. With 35, which has sewer, just for what you're talking about, because if I see a 35 and have it checked for having a sewer inspection, and they've checked this box too, now I got a problem.
How often do you have a septic and a sewer hookup? It's
Yeah, so I
the
mean,
place I'm renting. Yeah.
this is when you're reviewing an offer, you're trying to make sure you're debugging it, because I don't trust how the form's been filled out when I receive them from another broker. Because I don't know if it's a broker that's never written a land deal before or done a complex deal before. And so I want the expertise for our team and for us when we do that to have the flag saying, this is how I'd review this to make sure I don't have conflicting terms in my contract. Okay. So as I come down through here, water qualities, if there's a well addendum in that purchase and sale agreement, I want to make sure I don't have a conflict. Okay. I mean, because you can do this and I've seen an offer where this is the only thing checked on this entire form is 4 pages long. And if 35F is 1 page. Okay. Or 22R 1 page. And so I put a 35F and a R in there and eliminate 2 more pages and all of this scary stuff, take it out. Because when you're trying to review an offer with your buyers, the more there is pages to go through, the more they glass over on you and you lose them. You know, they're really
And the only
listening.
ones that qualify on this one are the ones that get
Check.
checked.
Yeah, if you don't check anything, there's only 1 box checked on 4 pages. That's the only thing that's applicable, because only that's checked. Is applicable.
I remember the first time I looked at this and I was like.
Yeah. Well, and that's how
What
a
am I
buyer,
putting
a
my
buyer,
buyer through if I do this?
a buyer feels the same way, and the seller feels the same way. If you want the seller to say yes, accept the offer, there's 2 sides of people that don't read these contracts every day that we're talking to, right?
And as a listing broker, the water quality, not the quantity, but the quality, that testing company right over
Cascade
there,
Analytics.
they give you free packages and instructions on how to do it. And so as a listing person, if there's any question at all, the seller should just, it's not that expensive. They should be able to get that done.
Do ask them about the procedure, because you get to take the filter off and run it for depends on who you talk to
Well,
about how long you're supposed to run it for, but
If you do a flow test, the well drillers or they're out there, they're doing the water test, they take the sample right there where they're doing the water test and turn it in for you. It's $75.
oh yeah.
So, I mean, but anyhow, for water quantity, 25R, that's another, if they have that checked, that's another red flag. Timber, that's, if there's timber, that you definitely want to do that. So then there's feasibility, and that's where 35F has a paragraph on it, but as we reviewed earlier, item U on 25. So if this is checked, 25 goes away, we know that, so that's okay. 35F, if they put 35F in there and check this box, then now I got a problem again. I got to either pull a 35F out and leave 22LA in, but if that's the only box that's checked, or if they have an RA checked, I mean, at some point you want to clean up the contract, so it's only in one place and use your judgment. But also read this, I'm not gonna do it, but get curious and take 25, 35F and this and kind of look at them and get familiar with them about where are they different? Yeah. And then in performing any investigations, the buyer shall not interfere with any of the existing tenants and operations on the property. So this one here is talking about if somebody's leasing the property. Remember, it's a large acreage and they might have rented out 20 acres for somebody to put a crop on. Or to use with the RV pad for camping and recreational, okay?
Coordination
And then
of schedules and people, who's allowed to be there when you have renters on the property.
if there's renters or it's leased property, and if that's the case, then this is the correct form to use, because it addresses it right there. Okay. Irrigation water, again, if you have crops or irrigation water, there's two types of irrigation water. You have state and you have federal. And federal is pertinent to land, you cannot transfer it. However, state Department of Ecology, you can sell your water rights and keep your property. So understanding water rights and what's there, that's a big deal.
Are there federal water rights around here?
Oh, yeah.
Or are they mostly state?
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's a lot of federal, almost all your orchards up and down the river and all around Chelan, and they're all in federal.
Which
Not
one's
all of them. I
transferable
shouldn't say
and
that,
what's
but
not?
majority of them are.
State's transferable and federal is not.
That federal's not. And it'll never be expanded either. And that's why, let me just take Chelan for an example. If I go out to Manson and you have the Lake Chelan Reclamation District, they will never expand outside where they're at. But every year that an orchard converts into residential, if it's 20 acres and goes to 10, then it's a portion half and half, the 10 and 10. So it stays with the land, and as it drops up, you have a lot of homes that are on 1 acre or so out there that have irrigation, and they can just make a little mini orchard and keep their lawn green and have more water than they could ever use. But if it's state, they don't keep it watered and green. The satellites up above that sit back in Department of Ecology pick up it going brown. They'll take your water rights away if you leave it that way. I think it's over 2 years, 3 years. I don't know the exact years, but if they'll take it away, I don't think they're trying to. Probably not, because
they're trying to get those rights.
They are trying to control the water. They are looking at taking that water right back. And that's why you drive by and see sprinklers out there, just nothing but grass and the orchard's gone, and they're just going all the time, all summer long. And go, oh, what a waste of water. They're preserving their water rights. They have to do it.
So they don't get it taken away. Interesting.
That's correct. Yeah.
And
If you
that's
don't use them, you lose them.
So, I mean, that's an area, to learn more about if you're getting into land and acreage and doing that. Understanding water rights is a good topic. As a matter of fact, that's something we'll probably talk to Russ, because we've done a lot of stuff with Mark McKee and also a couple of the other attorneys that are water rights attorneys. And having one come in and speak to us sometime would probably be very valuable for everybody, because they can kind of give an overview and how that works. Attorney review 22RA, if you have that in your agreement and you have it here, you've got it doubled up again. Here's where I mentioned earlier, might be something where a 22LA comes in handy, is because you want to have, it's indicated accessories are items included in addition to the stated in specific terms 5 of the agreement. Portable buildings, sheds, other buildings, game feeders, livestock, troughs, irrigation equipment, fuel tanks, submersible pumps, pressure tanks, corrals and pens, gates, chutes, or anything else out there that you see that you might want to have, the duck blind or something,
Well, so this would be a good one to add if you have one that says that buildings are not have no value, but you want to make sure they're included.
Right there.
in that.
Indicate these accessories, they are included in this sale. So that's another, and that's what I'm trying to make the distinction. 35F is wide open for feasibility, but there's some things embedded here. This is where if you had a 21 and you have a residential sale and it's on a 20-acre parcel and they have some of these buildings out there, then I'd want to put a 22LA in there. And I want to hit accessories, and I want to make sure they're in and fill in the others. And I might say, see, attach form 34 right there. And now I have 34 tied back into 22LA on accessory. And now I have it very clearly attached it to my purchase and sale agreement, and I can articulate what I expect to be as part of the sale. Okay. And then here's the CRP programs as far as conservation reserve programs, wetland restorations. If there's any of that on there, I put little dollar signs here. It's an alert. You want to find out about that? If that's why you want to use this form, if you think if that's in play anywhere, because you want to make sure if there's going to be any assessed taxes or fees on that, that it's handled by the seller at closing. So it isn't carried over to your buyer.
So on that, you ran into that, Melody, where they were so stipulated that people could not even walk on some of that land.
Yep, couldn't even walk on it.
Yeah.
because-
Yeah, I remember that. We were involved with that.
Yeah,
document-
He just now got back to the position of being, getting funding.
That was,
I was.
there were so many
glad you
red
guys
flags
helped me
going
with
off on that. Yeah. And so now we're on page 4. See, this is a nice long form. Page 4, document review. If this box is checked, the seller shall deliver the buyer a copy of the following documents. There might be easements, which should show up in the title report, but there might be things with wells, there might be things with septic systems, or there might be shared well agreements. There might be something that's a document that you'd like to make sure that your client reviews.
In Reni's sale, there was the agreement with the water district.
There was
And there were about 4 things that the lender needed to see.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that you know that in advance, I mean, on the buying side, so that they can make sure they get those in time.
Right, so knowing this is going to help me ask better questions to the lender.
Yeah.
As to what they.
it's a great form for that, for interviewing your buyer. It's a lot of topics here that are covered, but if there's not a lot of them covered on this, and it's just a good old 20 acres up there, then they're just going to put a house on it, and they can go out and do a water witching with a well driller and do a perk test, and they're good. 35F is your champ. But if any of these flags go off, then this is the right form for you. Additional inspections, specialty inspections is a section for that. You need a number of days to plug in on it if you're going to use that one. Tax designation. I got little dollar signs all over the place on this one. Okay, if there's going to be something for a notice of classification continuation, because many of these things you can continue and the government can deny continuation. And if that happens, then taxes have to be paid. Yes, and that somebody depends on whether that assessment is going to happen in time before closing. Some of them are after closing and it gets stuck on the buyer. And you want to know which one.
Well,
Okay.
could you, if you know that there's going to be an assessment?
You don't have a deal yet. This is your purchase sale agreement.
Mhm.
Check the box and then get into it in mutual.
And good, and then, that said it aside in escrow. Be paid by the seller. I mean, would that be?
Well, right here, it says assessor when the property is removed from this classification shall be paid by seller.
But if the deal's closed and you don't have the dollar amount, or you know the dollar amount, and it's just not, that classification's not gonna get changed till after the deal, would you?
Well, that would come out during mutual when you're doing that investigation, that would become evident when you approach that agency and you put in the buyer puts in for a continuation, so they keep it. And it's denied at that time, you go, oh, well, maybe I talked to the seller and the seller broker saying, we're thinking about whether we're going to waive this and pay it, or whether they're going to fail inspection or fail feasibility and get out of the deal. Is your seller willing to split it? Or does that mean now you're negotiating and saying, we're still within our feasibility period, so let's negotiate, maybe get a win-win out of this and keep the deal together. Because if it's going to be too much money, you might want to advise your buyer to get out of the deal. It's up to them.
Right. Thank you.
Notice of classification of continuance, retained buyer fails to execute a notice of classification, the county assessor must reassess the property taxable value and retroactively impose additional taxes applicable to interest and penalties which the buyer shall pay. That's the area I'm talking about right there. That's what you want to look out for. So if that classification, this you will find if you go up Indiana Valley, you get up in Mud River and Moss Ridge or Mo Ridge, you get up there, there's you'll find these classifications scattered around back up there.
A lot of those, like up the Chumstick, and Mary Canyon as well. And it's interesting to note with timberland. It's just a side note that they are technically exempt from seller disclosures. Timberland doesn't require a Form 17C. If you're going to sell it, you can talk to your seller about maybe providing it. But yeah, I've ran into that a couple times where we pressed
I didn't know that.
Ken
Yeah.
West to provide a Form 17C for a piece of land that somebody was going to camp and hunt on up Mary Canyon, and it was tax classified as timberland, which is wonderful, super cheap taxes for them. But we wanted a disclosure, and it came down to like he didn't want to do paperwork so badly. He really dug into it. He's like, nope, it says right there, law, timberland's exempt, just like an estate sale or something like that.
This will be included in the minutes. Just kind of wrapping up here. I did make a quick reference guide for this. Put some questions in there, making sure if it's not thinking about a developer or something really complex, this might not be the right form. I went through the acknowledgements, I went through the types of contingencies and whether it's buyer pays or who pays it. Went through the additional provisions, put some notes and where to locate that on the form. So that again, this will be in the minutes. Looking at time wrapping up, there was one other thing that in today, I was trying to have enough time to come back to. Last week, we had discussions about 35R that had to do with timing. And in the email I sent out on that, this is what was in the email, but I don't know that everybody always reads the emails. I sent out an awful lot of stuff. Sorry if I bury people, but it's always useful to go back and look at it. So what I want to draw attention to last week is this one right here, because it's only take a minute, but if I go through this, if I look at 35 and I fill it out on line 22, the period 10-day default, really got to ask, is 10 days going to allow me not only to have time to schedule the inspection and perform and get a report, but is that going to be time for me to talk to a contractor and get a bid to do the work? And here's why I say that. I see so many 35Rs sent to the seller wanting the seller to perform a whole bunch of work. I don't know one seller that wants to become a renovation contractor. They have a sale. They want to get out of the house. They want to go on with their life. They want to get out of there. And now they get somebody that wants them to go and hire a contractor and get a handyman and do all of this stuff.
Before closing.
And no, before you have mutual. I mean, before closing, yeah. Because here we are, and if I have my buyer proactive and I can get more than 10 days and I have a contractor's estimate, I can't give copies of an inspection report, but I can give a contractor estimate. And I can say, perform these or this amount of dollars. And
But you have the 5-day caveat that you can ask for additional.
I have a contractor estimate to back up the amount of dollars I'm asking for. Now, I don't have to attach it to the 35R when it goes back, because when I deliver it in my email to the other broker, I can say, I have the estimate, and if the seller would like to see it, I'd be happy to send. And that way you can give an out to reduce the cost of the offer, have the money. So then, because remember we talked about earlier, if the buyer hires the contractor to do those fixes, and Brian Boyle brought up a wonderful point last week, is that if you say go fix this and doing it, you know how renovation is, and you open it up and there's a big problem behind it, no, I just have to fix this and put it back. Do you really want to be in that situation? Let's get a contractor estimate, and let me help protect you, because when you're in control, you can make sure it's done and done right, because they work for you, not for the seller.
Right.
And so
I like that.
I always like having a
Both
contractor
sides.
estimate. Okay, I mean, so this is, again, we're trying to be forward thinking, and can I do that in 10 days? I ask myself, I don't think so. I want to ask for more time.
Now, when I'm doing listing, when I'm working with a listing, that's what I tell the seller too. I'm like, I advise you to get and doing this. Yes, you're going to know everything, but then you're also going to be in charge of what you're willing to fix.
That's correct.
And you're going to know the things, and we can upfront state, this is all we're doing. and we've done this, this and this, so we've given a good effort
And
showing.
when this is waived, it's a done deal.
Right.
Once you did it. So then I go to the next part of the form on line 44 for additional inspections, 5 days. Well, I don't know about you, but if an additional inspection is going to be a plumber, electrician, roofer, some specialty air conditioning guy or something, are they going to pop right out there tomorrow and get you a report and fix you up real quick? So what I've done here is I've asked some questions to try, when you're filling out the forms, that is 5 days enough time for a buyer to get a plumber, electrician? Okay. What if the buyer then went to get a contractor to develop the scope and cost of the corrective work? The contractor quote can be used for the buyer to negotiate with the seller for 35 hours. So I'm challenging 5 days. Now I come down and say, okay, within the time period it's submitted for 35, line 49, seller's time period for review is 3 days default. It's kind of a pressure cooker on the seller. As a buyer, I wouldn't mind 3 days. But if I'm on the listing side, I might talk to my seller and ask him, if that's the case, will this be enough time for the seller? What if the seller wants to contact a contractor to look at the scope and the costs of the modification and repair work? I got an estimate here from this contractor. Would you go out and look and tell me if that scope will work and cost, and then I can, so I can compare, if it's reasonable. 3 days is hard for them to do that. So you can see where I'm going with this one. Then the last one is on the seller. This is probably the most important date in Form 35R, because if the buyer time period for review is 3 days, the buyer broker is this enough time to allow for a negotiation for alternative solutions and to reach mutual agreement between the buyer and the seller? Because written right in Form 35, this time period for negotiating repairs and modifications shall not repeat. This is the end. No further time is allowed. If you do not respond, it's waived and you're not buy the house. Otherwise, you have to terminate. That's a pressure cooker. In 3 days,
So
the-
we could,
and-
so it's no repeat, like even if we did a 34R that both parties agreed
this
to
is
extend.
it. I mean,
Okay.
it's designed for a purpose. It's pushing it to a head.
Well, it's to keep it from going.
Yeah.
Did you?
Unless you
They
sign
don't want to
around
go
the
back and forth
Form
and back and
34
forth and back and forth and
specifically
back and forth.
extending those timelines, correct?
If you did that, I don't know why you couldn't do that, but you'd have
If
to
you
have
just
the
hit a
seller,
wall.
but you'd have to have the seller sign it.
Right, that's the thing, is if both
And the
parties.
seller
agree-
has this, what are they going to do?
Yeah, yeah.
If their agent is.
So
correct.
the key thing is make it more than 3 days, because you can come back and say, okay, maybe the seller didn't answer at all, so you can make another offer. Maybe they answered back with something you didn't like and you want to get something back in front of them. If they don't like that, maybe try something else. But you want to be emailing with that other broker to that seller if you're on the buy side, and back and forth. If the seller wants to hold a deal together, try and find something they can agree on. Give the time for those two clients to be able to not feel that pressure to find something they both agree to and hold the deal together. And that takes a lot of emails, but you should be ready by 8 o'clock, in front of the 9 o'clock, to have a notice for termination to protect your buyer if they want to get out of that, if that's not going to be acceptable to them, and try and negotiate like crazy up until that deadline. But I just think 3 days is that for me, that's the date that I like to add.
In our market now, that's feasible. I mean, asking for that time frame, but in a crazy seller's market that where we were at the last several months.
So,
And you've got people coming in and saying, no inspections, and you're like, no, don't do that.
So- so anyhow, I just, this was in the front page of the email I sent out last week. I just want to draw it to everybody's attention. I thought it's a really handy tool. It really helps to have a conversation with the buyer when you're writing an offer, because inspection is a big deal. Having a contractor estimate is a big deal. I don't care about sharing the inspection report. Who cares? What's the scope of work that I have an interest in being repaired, and what's it going to cost, and where's a good estimate for it? And if the seller is not willing to do it, that's fine. How about a deduct? But it's not a deduct because I'm double dipping. It's because I have a good hard number from a contractor. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. That was great.
Say, Maria, I'm getting ready to shut things off. Who else is out there?
We got Aisha and Cinda.
And
on the
Isha.
list.
Aisha.
Anybody else?
Aisha. Mondre.
And
And- Hi, Cinda.
She was the one that went to Rover store.
So I just want to make sure if you have any questions before we sign off.
Cinda Bragg.
Oh, Cinda. I was like, wait, Cinda.
Okay, I know Cinda and Ashia and Maria all have your microphones off, and so I'll wave goodbye.
Bye.
Take care.
Nice meeting you.
Bye-bye.